Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Is there anyone outside yet? They need to be warned that if they don't attend this session, they cannot go to the social and get free booze. Okay. My name is Joe Donnermeyer. I am retired from The Ohio State University. And it's good to be back to a small campus. I am a graduate of a place called Thomas More College, 800 students. Thomas More, for you who don't know anything about him, had a big argument with King Henry VIII over a second wife and lost his head. Yeah. So he became, in essence, a model for a different Catholic college. And then I go from 800 students to a campus of 62,000. And I can tell you that I appreciate the small campuses. So it's great to be here. We have two excellent presenters. Walter DeKeseredy, West Virginia University, whom you already have met via questions and also via his chair of the previous session, and Kirsten Hecker, Pacifica Graduate Institute. She will talk about behind closed doors on covert aggression. She's now over in Cologne, Germany. Meanwhile, Walter is going to present on hidden toxicity, psychological abuse in the academy. Come on up.
Well, hello again, everyone. It's indeed an honor to be invited to present here. This memorable event brings back memories to 1994, 20 years ago. I don't know, some of the Canadian folks in the audience might be aware of this, but back at they used to be called the Learned Society meetings, they're now called the Congress, and featured at Calgary in 1993 was a number of sessions titled Violence and Collective Responsibility. And the person who organized that event was Canny Stark Adamant, who was president of Women's Issues, no, vice president of Women's Issues for the Social Science, was then called the Social Science Federation of Canada. And the theme of the event was psychological violence in the academy. And at that time, I remember just having completed the Canadian National Survey of Women Abuse in University and College Dating, which included measures of psychological violence and the hostility directed at me and my co-researchers about psychological violence. People were trying to dismiss it. And at that time, despite a wealth of information on different types of violence against women, there wasn't much really being done on the psychological abuse of women. It was almost as if we were going backwards to sticks and stones may break my bones, but words won't hurt me. So that was, when you talk about triggering, we generally talk about it in a negative way, but this event has triggered some very wonderful memories and got a bunch of Canadians on the path to start examining some of the issues that we are examining at this event. And if you can find this book, try to get it, because it's really interesting, at least for historical purposes, right? To look at the history. It's titled Violence and Collective Responsibility, and it's the proceedings of the 1994 Symposium on Violence that was sponsored by the Social Science Federation of Canada. So I'm going to talk about a hidden toxicity, the psychological abuse of women in the academy. And I look at psychological abuse as existing on a continuum. When I talk about a continuum, I'm not talking about moving from least to more serious. I'm heavily influenced by British radical feminist Liz Kelly, who created the continuum of sexual violence that ranges from catcalling, workplace sexual harassment, all the way into, actual physical acts of forced penetration. And she argues that each one is not necessarily more serious than the other. It's up to somebody's subjective interpretations, their subjective experiences. And often these things seep into each other, the different types of behavior. So my conceptual framework that drives my presentation is heavily influenced by Kelly's continuum. And I've modified it since, along with Joe Donnermeyer. We have a continuum of woman abuse. So I want to demonstrate today, and there's ample evidence of this, that colleges and universities are among the most psychologically abusive workplaces for women. I kind of get fed up, with people talking about woke culture and people like DeSantis and all this, portraying, colleges and universities as, simply ivory towers that are divorced from, the realities of the everyday world. Nothing can be further from the truth. I think some of the most abusive people in the world are academics, to be honest with you. And I mean, just absolutely horrific. And we've heard many examples, obviously, today, and a lot of us have our own personal experiences that we're sharing here and elsewhere. And I want to show that these institutions of higher learning tolerate and reward the psychological victimization of female faculty and support staff. See, we haven't talked much about support staff so far in this event. And let's not forget, most support staff at most institutions of higher learning are females. And they're subjected to a substantial amount of abuse, and they're arguably more vulnerable than tenured faculty. So we need to think about that, And I want to introduce a theoretical framework I've developed for the purpose of this conference, what I call a gendered social bond male peer support theory of female psychological abuse in institutions of higher learning. Now, since the early 1980s, many researchers have examined the physical and sexual abuse of women, mainly students in institutions of higher learning. And those of us who live in the United States, we can remember, speaking of Biden, one of the good things he did, along with Obama, was mandated the campus climate surveys, and all institutions of higher learning that were public had to conduct these climate surveys. And the frightening thing about these climate surveys is that things have gotten worse. See, in the early 1980s, Mary Koss, who was based in Ohio, she conducted, sponsored by Ms. Magazine, the first national sexual violence on campus survey. And then I conducted the Canadian equivalent back in 1993. And back then, it was 1 in 4. Acts of sexual violence. Each student experienced, female students, 1 out of every 4 female students in the past year, not in their career lifetimes. Now, when you factor in digital forms of violence, things are even worse. In fact, what we're seeing for those of us who study poly-victimization, we see a co-occurrence of digital and physical violence. And what we've uncovered in our research is that those who are physically assaulted, sexually assaulted, are also at very high risk of being digitally assaulted too. I think it's important, this is one of the very important things about this conference, is that the things folks are talking about here are just as, if not more, worthy of empirical and theoretical scrutiny and political attention as the physical acts of violence that get lots of attention. And again, the climate surveys, if you look at, say, my school, and I can admit this to, I'm not violating any ethics, our female sexual assault rate is 34%. It's the second highest in the United States. Only Bucknell University has a higher rate. That's just staggering when you think about that, right? It's just staggering. So things have actually gotten worse, despite all the research, all the efforts, and so on and so forth, right? So, we know that a substantial number of students are experiencing these types of things, so why wouldn't faculty and support staff? And if we think about psychological abuse, I come from a medical family, and my son-in-law is a doctor, he's a surgeon, and he was talking about showing me these studies in medical journals. This is one of the wonderful things about interdisciplinary work, that psychological abuse generates more fear than physical abuse. And brain studies actually show that emotional pain can stimulate the same brain circuits as physical pain. So I found this really interesting. He's showing me JAMA and the British Journal of Medicine and all these things, and he became really absorbed into this because he started seeing certain, medical consequences of the types of things that, we're talking about at this conference, that there's serious physical implications. I was talking with a colleague today around lunchtime. We were sharing our, experiences of physical pain and psychological stress and what it does to you, and I think a lot of people can relate to this. And there's a wealth of information, tons of it. I have shelves. I've been studying violence against women for 41 years. That's a long time, 41 years. And there's a wealth of research that shows that numerous women describe incidents of psychological humiliation and verbal harassment as their worst abusive experiences, their worst, regardless of whether they had been physically assaulted and the degree of injury. I'll never forget when I was doing focus groups to develop the Canadian National Survey of Women Abuse in University and College Dating. I had a focus group. There was a young woman. She was a fantastic photographer. She wanted to work for Life magazine or Time. And she put up her hand because I asked the students to look at the questionnaires. And she said, "Sir, I really like your questionnaire, but something's missing." And I said, "Please tell me, please." She said, "Well, you know, I had this boyfriend, and when he broke my arm, I could go to the doctor and get a cast. When he smashed me in the mouth, I could go to the dentist and get my teeth fixed. But when he ripped up my pictures and told me I'm a fat fuck, who could I go to?" And that just that got me on this path of psychological abuse. But you know, it's interesting, much of the work on the psychological abuse of women in the academy focuses on sexual harassment. We know there's a lot of research on that, right? But there are other things that are going on, such as mobbing and a few other things we're going to talk about. But you know, the academy, if you look, I looked at the meta-analyses of sexual harassment. Just sexual harassment alone, the academy is second only to the military. My God, you know, you would like to think that this is a safe place, a haven where, you know, people can have dialogue and discussion and exchange. But it's one of the most sexually abusive environments. Now, mobbing, you know, we need to have some conceptual debates here, obviously. That's what we're trying to do. I understand one of the key goals of this conference is to advance the study of mobbing scientifically, right? Which is a good thing. Now, I came across coup. You were talking, I think, Ken, it was you who was talking about coup, and I came across Davenport et al. And a few others. And there seemed to be, you know, my reading of the literature was nowhere near as good as most of you here. But it seemed to focus, the conceptualization focused heavily on the malicious attempt to force a worker out of the workplace. Now, similar to the term revenge porn, which I have a problem with, you know, that's why most of us use the term image-based sexual abuse. The motives can vary. It's not just driving someone out of the workplace. Some people really get off, you know, torturing someone. The power and control issue that was discussed earlier today. Some people gang up on their colleagues, not only for the purpose of forcing someone out of the workforce. Some people do it for a variety of reasons, such as for a joke, to maintain dominance and control, for revenge. And I think the term mobbing sometimes, and we can debate this, puts too much emphasis on the perpetrator's motives at the expense of the damage done to the victims. That's one of my concerns as a person who studies psychological abuse, and we can talk more about that. Female faculty, we know about who speak out, they get targeted, we know what people talk about their experiences here. But what about the plight of support staff? Again, we haven't talked about them today. I didn't hear anything. Maybe people are focusing on it, but I didn't hear it. But I think we really need to do that because they're an integral part. Yeah, I'm in good shape, Joe. Abusive supervision. Let's not forget, you know, Peter, you were talking about administrators, unions, and so on. I mean, let's not forget how you may have someone in the maintenance department and how they're abusing, you know, female faculty there or student interns and so on and so forth, right? These things need to be addressed. We need to start thinking in terms of mobbing and psychological abuse as a university, as a community that consists not just of us, okay? Because really, we should start treating our support staff, the maintenance workers, the people who cook the food, as our colleagues, right? So we need to think about abusive supervision. I will argue, you're going to see the theoretical framework. My argument is, in my theoretical framework, it is those who are kind and civil to each other who are the deviants. If you start thinking, I'm taking Travis Hershey's social bond. He was trying to explain conformity, not deviance. When you think about the breadth of sexual assault, like at least 1 in 4, coast to coast in this country, using very rigorous methodology, representative sample surveys, That's really scary. And when you think about all the data about sexual harassment, the other types of abuse, the people who are decent to each other, they're the deviants.
What?
Yes, statistically, yes, they are.
Why call a crime?
Generation and transmission of rumors is one of the most dangerous things, right? Joe and I have been targeted. We could talk to you about a guy who's generated some really destructive rumors. That is one of the most common ways of mobbing, actually, spreading rumors, you know? This Australian academic, the things that he would say, right, Joe? Was it just absolutely disgusting?
He's part of my presentation.
Good, okay. Now, what about single blind reviews of manuscripts? You want to talk about mobbing? That, you know, you submit your work for review, blind review. And someone, let's face it, if you're in a field, like take mobbing, let's just take that. It's a relatively small group of people. You all know each other. So let's say one of you doesn't like somebody and you decide to, you know, just gratuitously trash a paper. That's a form of mobbing too. Just takes one negative comment. What about a grant? I don't like you. So I'm going to do a review for the National Institute of Justice and I'm going to make sure you don't get that fucking grant. Right? And people do that. People do that. You know, and under the guise of quality research, we have to maintain these standards, right? Standards, okay? You know, it's just crazy. Okay. Learned helplessness. Yep, I'm almost done. There's no office politics gene, right? It's, you know, it's not immutable behavior. It can be extinguished. Contra-power harassment, students ganging up. You talked about consumers today. Yeah, and they know it. They damn well know it. And at our school, our president, you know, makes a point of telling us about this. Okay. And it's typically females. Okay, I just want to get to the theoretical framework. This is my theoretical framework. You can't understand, as I mentioned, the point I made when Peter was presenting, you can't understand the colleges and the universities without...
Mike Wilson.
Oh, yeah. You can't understand the colleges and universities, how they operate without looking at these broader inequalities. You cannot. You know, you cannot. And the norms, values, and beliefs of institutions of higher learning resemble what's going on out there. Discipline, you know, Foucault comes into play. Then it translates into the treatment of female faculty and staff. Their resistance, they resist. The women aren't just passive victims, they resist, they challenge. And then what happens is the male employees bond to conventional social order, because it's typically men in charge. How many female presidents of universities do you know? How many? Yeah, exactly. And then you have a male peer support effect, which is attachments to male peers, the resources they provide that encourage and legitimate violence against women. And that translates into the psychological victimization of female faculty and support staff. So that's the theoretical model that I've developed. It hasn't been tested yet, but I plan to. I plan to test it because you know what? Over 35 years of international research shows that one of the most powerful determinants of any type of violence against women is male peer support. So I'll end on that. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Walt, and thank you.